Don told me that he had to memorize the Beatitudes and recite them before the church council before he could be confirmed. You know, like the Beatitudes, they were seen as a reminder to oneself of the way a Christian should live. And I've heard them many times as a sort of challenge, as a way to live differently, to live more compassionately, to live more humbly. And surely it is true that we would all do well to live our days with as much kindness and mercy as possible. But truthfully, in Matthew's poetry, it doesn't say that Jesus told them to live this way so that they can be blessed. Jesus simply states it as fact. You are blessed. And I am blessed just by knowing that today. Because I hear this litany of blessing more delicately than I normally do. It sounds softer to me. And it may be because right now I am acutely aware of how people might hear, "Blessed are you who mourn." How it is that those words sound so utterly ridiculous. But why would Jesus say this if there wasn't something true about it? Because there is no one among us who will never mourn. Why does Jesus promise us that in those days which seem to never end, those days which are full of feeding and crying and caring and pacing and worrying, when those days finally do come to an end, where is the blessing in that? Blessing most certainly can't mean happy. As many of you know, I was just at the funeral of my mother-in-law. And I was surrounded there by my whole family. Those people who were in true, outright mourning. And sure, there were moments of laughter, moments that were encapsulated in hugs. But I don't think anyone was happy to be there. None of us wanting to be there, but all of us knowing that we needed to be there. And while I was there, I heard from a friend in my home congregation that one of our youth, a few years older than just my oldest, had committed suicide. And it hurt. It hurt deeper than it would have if I hadn't already been mourning. Because the pain felt nearer than it should have, maybe, because I really didn't know this boy very well. But for me, my knowing loss in that moment connected me so much to the loss that I knew that parent must be feeling. And so when I read these words, "Blessed are those who mourn," I'm aware that so much of life is mourning. Not just in dying, but in loss. Loss of relationship and loss of life. Loss of dreams and hopes. And I've discovered this week something that we know, but life becomes sort of strange when you're mourning. But now, as I've kind of taken this week and I've kind of looked back, like stepped back and looked a little bit at loss, I realized that in becoming acquainted with it, I'm able to know something more about that parent whose son died. And I realized that I know the magnitude of what sending a card means. And I realized the kind of soothing, salvific being that tears sort of have in them, I realized blessing. That's what it is. It's blessing. And some would say that Jesus promises these blessings as future reward, that things will eventually be okay, like when we get to heaven. But I disagree with that, because as strange as it may sound, I have found some profound knowing in the here and the now of sadness, of mourning, of all that stuff that Jesus says is blessed. There was this moment at the funeral when Carter got up. Confession time, I'm not a fan of the 23rd Psalm. I like it, but it's just not my go-to one. And so there was this moment when Carter got up at the funeral, and he read the 23rd Psalm, and I heard it said different. And it was blessing. It was like of God and not of him. Because his words were wiser, and his being was comforting. It was blessing kind of arising. But we don't like this. We don't like to walk through the valley of the shadow of death or walk meekly and humbly with God. We'd rather run, or we'd rather fly or escape. We would rather not even have to contemplate blessing being related to sorrow. But blessing arises not because loss itself is good, but because it's not the end. We will know comfort, and often we will know comfort from another who has known the same kind of loss, or who is in touch with that comfort. Blessed to be a blessing is sort of circular in my mind. And I've thought so much this week about blessing, like what is it? Instead of just saying we're blessed. Like, what is blessing actually? And I don't really have the words to say what it is. We just know when it arises. But we do bless things. We do bless people and circumstances. And in my mind, blessing sort of takes on a shape. It's sort of as if we draw this circle of light, like connecting us to one another and then to Jesus. Carving out a space, like a kind space, is sort of what blessing says to me. And this doesn't make the mourning or the brokenheartedness or the hunger or the thirst or any of whatever it is go away. But the blessing space does give space for Jesus to act and for Jesus to be. For Jesus to bless us and to use us as blessing. Maybe Jesus speaks a truth about blessing that we cannot even begin to understand until we are meek, until we are mourning, until we do become thirsty. Perhaps there is some type of favor, some type of protection that does come in loss and in pain that we wouldn't otherwise know. And I don't like that idea, but I do remember that before Jesus goes up the mountain, before he says these blessings, he had been down the mountain, right? He had been down healing and crying with people and weeping with people. People that aren't really any different from you and I. And I remember that Jesus took all of that to himself. And he let himself go to them. And we know this, that we know that in the Bible it says that sometimes Jesus could feel a little bit of power go from him. And I imagine that if that's the case, that the power is going to another, that then the pain and the sorrow must also be going to Jesus. And he must have felt that too. becoming one with that person, sort of circular again. And those he touched then became a bit wholer, with a bit of Jesus in them. And I guess that's what I've learned anew, like in a new way this week. Because a blessing I've known personally is that losing a loved one doesn't mean that love doesn't exist. Because I've seen it and I felt it. And I've been strengthened by it. And blessing does that. It imparts strength. Jesus' strength, I would say. And so when I remember that Jesus wasn't sitting alone up there on the mountain, that he was there with his disciples, I realized that as they walked in his footsteps, Jesus cultivated in them a life of kindness and mercy. Because they were also down the mountain, healing and weeping and crying. We're part of Jesus' plan to bless this world, which means we will be called upon to be in the suffering of others. And I don't think it matters, like for me this week it was mourning, but I don't think it matters what the type of suffering is. It's a doorway to the profound love of God, and not only just the profound love of God, but it's also an opportunity to care more deeply for one another. Blessing affects change. Once blessed, we are never ever the same again. Sometimes we're the poor and the hungry and the mourning who need to be blessed. And sometimes we're the rich and the full and the glad who are called to bless. One cannot exist without the other. Please join me in prayer. Strengthen us, O God, and remind us that we are eternally blessed by your very presence in our lives, and surround us in our grief and sorrow, and also in our joys and our peace. Let us know all these places as spaces of blessing. You are blessed. Amen.